Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Karen Agresti, SDSA. Today, I'm delighted to welcome set decorator Cathy T. Marshall, SDSA, and production designer Judy Rhee to discuss their latest collaboration on the Peacock series Poker Face Season 2. Brilliantly created by Natasha Leone and Ryan Johnson, Poker Face is a Mystery of the Week series following Charlie Cale, played by Natasha, who has an extraordinary ability to detect when someone is lying. In season 2, Charlie hits the road again in her Barracuda, where she encounters a new cast of odd characters and strange crimes she can't help but solve, even with the mob still out for her. This season's guest stars include Cynthia Erivo, Giancarlo Esposito, Katie Holmes, and Aquafina. Poker Face is a hilarious, wild ride, and Charlie is always fighting for the underdog, which is something we could all use more of these days. Judy and Cathy, your first partnership on Poker Face led to an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Production Design. We're excited to hear more about season 2. Judy, Poker Face is a road trip kind of series, and I want to hear about your road to production designing.
So I went to art school first for photography and sculpting, and I then became interested in film and then transferred to NYU, went to film school there for undergrad. And while I was there, we had to shoot films and then sort of talk about it. And what I realized a lot of the students were doing were focusing on camera and lighting and really not what they were filming. So I became interested in helping a lot of the student films tell their story visually. And that's when I realized what production design was, what actually it was, and became interested in that. So I think that has helped me to become the production designer that I am, which is always about helping to visually tell the story, which even in the beginning, a lot of people didn't really focus on or didn't really know how to utilize that as part of the process. So yeah, that's how production design came to be for me.
What was your first break in the film business? The one, like, who opened the first door for you that led you to, this long and successful road to designing?
My first break, my first job was when I was bartending. I was going through school and working, waitressing and bartending, and one of the regular customers had come in, and he was doing makeup for the Metropolitan Opera at the time, but was working on a horror film. And he came in and said, "I'm working on a horror film. They're going to fire the entire art department. You should go down and try to get a job as an intern or a PA." So I went down that afternoon, got hired as an art intern. They still had those back then where you worked, didn't get paid, but you got to learn from every department. So I did that, doing pickups, painting props, painting sets, doing a little bit of everything. It was great first experience. And then after that, I was hired for their next horror film, and that was the first one was Frankenhooker by Frank Henenlotter, and then he went on to do a cult classic, by the way. He went on to do Basket Case 2, and then I was hired as a prop person, and it was just from that point on, I had met people who then recommended me, and then kept sort of climbing and working on various projects, and just kind of learning as I went along, which was you could still do in those days when there was non-union work.
Cathy. Hi. And now I know that Cathy has a degree in photography, and I often think that set decorators take the most beautiful photographs. And I want to know a little bit about your road, your path to decorating. Was it crooked? Was it? Tell me a little bit about how you got started, what your first big break was.
Well, it was kind of crooked. I mean, I lived in New York first and kind of moved from the South to New York and worked in public relations briefly. Then I went to Atlanta and somehow got a scholarship to go to one of the pre-SCAD schools, the Atlanta College of Art, where I switched from photography and video, switched from painting and drawing, which was how I went in, and then switched to photography and video to get the images faster and to do bent photography, and it seemed more creative to me. So I kind of enjoyed that. And while I was doing that, people I'd worked with in New York in public relations had started doing commercials and asked if I would work on commercials in Atlanta. Like once every month and a half, they came to shoot retail commercials. And I went, sure, to get paid. And I convinced my instructors to let me work and then show them what I was doing, let them come to the set and stuff. So I got extra credit for that and was able to graduate early and move back to New York after 3 years and started working in commercials. And that seemed to be my path. I was producing, then executive producing when I met my husband and started a production company. So I did that for a while. Realized later that my love was doing the sets. And I'd always created sets or done art direction on our commercials. And then I had a freelance career as well, working outside of our company for agencies and other production companies. So it evolved kind of on a crooked path, but it always stayed on focus with enjoying creating the environments of the sets that the action was taking place in. And having had that producing experience gave me the ability to budget and to know what the other crew people were doing, what their jobs were, and how it blended with what we do on set, pulling and working in collaboration with the other departments. So I kind of think it worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, it's like a crooked but parallel path.
Yes. Everything fed into the craft, I think, of what Judy and I do, which is design, production design, set decoration, creating these environments for the characters to shine and to give the directors and the actors some kind of motivation for what they end up doing on screen.
So now let's talk about Poker Face Season 2. Poker Face is a huge undertaking because each episode is like a standalone movie. Because of the nomadic nature of this kind of storytelling, each episode required a unique aesthetic and details that come with it. There are no IMART sets. Each episode is shot over 10 days. That's a pretty big challenge. Poker Face also has 2 decorators, Cathy and the wonderful Heather Loeffler, who are each in charge of their own episodes. Cathy, do you want to talk a little bit about how that works with the alternating decorators?
Well, on a show like Poker Face, it's critical to have 2 decorators. There's no way one decorator could be turning over the volume of work required to create each episode. We have so many sets, locations, and there, like you said, there's no AMWORT sets, meaning there's no established sets that carry over from episode to episode. So each episode is a story in itself, and everything created for that episode is self-contained. So it's a lot of work. And while one episode is shooting and prepping, the other episode is prepping, getting ready for the next shooting. So, and Heather and I worked well together. We complemented each other. We hopscotched around depending on the shooting schedule, and it flowed very nicely. I think the episodes are all very exciting, and each one is unique in its approach. So it's challenging, but it's doable and very necessary on this type of show.
And how are your teams structured?
Well, each team has an assistant decorator, which I think you worked on Poker Face. You were my assistant decorator. It was great. We also have a buyer or 2, depending on the volume. And there's a clearance person that everybody shares. There's PAs, there's set deck coordinators. And then we share our crew of set dressers, which can go to 30, 40 people, all very intrinsic to keeping track of the warehouse full of props and of set dressing and elements that come in for each of the sets, setting up sets, striking them, resetting them if we need to. So it's like a well-oiled machine, hopefully, at the critical points.
And as being part of it, I really was struck by the generosity between the two set deck teams, the women on it. It was a small office, you would hear someone looking for something, and then all of a sudden there'd be like a little Post-it with a secret tile place in New Jersey that, Barbara knew about, and vice versa. So that I think was a really positive aspect of having a, great second team working on the project as well.
And we did that with the prop department too. There were times when I would read the scripts first while the props were working on the current episode. And either we would start researching some things that we knew they might need and make recommendations, or and that helped move the process along for all the teams. It's get the job done, however, whatever it takes.
Yeah, and were there challenges about sharing a crew with another decorating team?
Very rarely. I mean, there were a couple of occasions where maybe the bulk of, say, the stage crew was needed for that team, and we needed to get started on sets coming up. But it worked. We had a great lead man in Dan, and we had a great team of set dressers, Chris running the stage. It was very well planned and coordinated.
Yes, thankfully I had two very strong decorators, and I don't know that it would work if you didn't have the experience of A, doing commercials, and B, of just the knowing how to get from A to B within that short period of time. It's not really a job where you can figure things out as you go. You really have to have a very clear plan of how you're going to get from Monday to next Wednesday with everything that you need. So yeah, I feel very fortunate to have had Cathy and Heather. Really, it was seamless in many ways to go from episode to episode. Having said that, I think the challenge for me was spending enough time with both teams to give feedback, to go over options and colors and direction of style for that particular episode, or to figure out if something wasn't available, what the alternatives were, and then to actually sit and look through it and rethink and pivot if we had to. So there were a lot of long hours for sure. I mean, just to sit and work through whatever that particular challenge was of the moment or that day, because things were coming up constantly of whether it's a location change, or a certain tile wasn't available, or the graphics that we were working for a wallpaper, the color didn't quite work out, or all those things that happen normally, but it happens in a sped up fashion with two different teams simultaneously running at full speed.
I'm always struck by the word pivot, because I think somebody's ability to pivot on a film set, especially in an art department, really separates the good and the great. And which kind of leads me into episode 202, Last Looks, which was shot I felt like there were a lot of pivots on that show. There was some builds that were originally not going to burn in real time that burned. And I'm curious about what went into that, like what you had to pivot. And it also ties into, first season was shot in Hudson Valley, and second season was based in Brooklyn and around the tri-state area. So Judy, I'm wondering how many sets were built on stage versus on location, and how Last Looks locations, which were incredible, were selected and modified.
So we knew early on that we had to find, it's scripted as a Gothic funeral home that's in the South, so somewhere outside of Florida. And we did a little bit of history to figure out that we located them in Amelia Island, just for authenticity of the history of the characters. So we had to find something that could exist there that was perhaps, not too far from Brooklyn, and with all the specific story notes of how we open, how they enter, what the particular movie character finds and sees. So it took a while to find this location, to find this home. And we ended up with two different locations, both in Westchester. And then we had to marry the whole entrance and then try to build around the architecture of this particular location that we're looking at, which is octagonal. The other location we found was not octagonal, but we cheated it as much as we could. And so the builds were based on the outline of this house. So this is the location that we're looking at here, is the second funeral home that is not the exterior that we just looked at. It worked out well. I think the challenge of this particular location was we were limited as to how much we could do and paint and modify here. In the end, they allowed us to do as much as we wanted to do, except for the viewing room, which we weren't able to paint, but we made work. And so we're looking here at
This was the waiting room
correct,
of the funeral parlor.
Yeah. So this was mostly a dress. We weren't allowed to paint in here. And it had all the more of the sort of Tudor Gothic details. And so in terms of working with Natasha, I think part of the directive overall for season 2 was to not go too far out of the city. And that sort of has certain limitations in terms of finding certain locations that were scripted and needed. This one was a challenge because of the traffic and the logistics of getting around New York City. Even though it's 18 miles, it could take up to an hour and a half. So that was just another layer of the challenge of the show. But yeah, thank God we found these 2 locations. That I think it worked out really well. And then the 2 sets that we built based on the 2 stage builds were the heliocentricity set, which is part of what we'll see or talk about later in the viewing room. So these are some early concepts for the movie within the movie that we ended up calling heliocentricity. And she wanted a kind of sort of Sun-Ra spaceship direction. And we integrated some space age alien sort of elements. I don't know if that came across necessarily, but that triangle mantle that we built, that was a key element to the storyline of the murder scene. And the lucite casket was also very much related to what's scripted in terms of what Charlie sees in the ceiling, the light fixture, and we also thought it worked for the heliocentricity space age theme of the movie set.
Cathy, can you talk a little bit about the character of the house? It was a multi-generational funeral home, multicultural, and can you share a little bit about how some of your choices and research came about for doing this kind of set?
Well, the octagonal house up on the Hudson River was mostly used as an exterior for its exterior qualities because it was so beautiful. The interior was basically a museum, and there was no way we could really shoot much inside of it without dismantling it and probably damaging it. So having this other location, which was a Gothic kind of feel space in New Rochelle, the college that you're looking at now, that was a room that we created into a viewing room for the funeral parlor. We brought in all of this stuff for the different storylines. So there was the mini movie scene that was going on, but it was also a real life funeral home where Fred was concerned because this film crew had invaded his space. So we were able to use this location to do all of our changes, have full of the film crew, make each room play the way it needed to play. Here, this was for the biker granny funeral. And then at one point, and this was the display room where we built these altars with the urn displays and the casket displays. Judy had these wonderful design for rotating casket displays on each corner. So we used end cap pieces, and it worked very well with that particular location. This gave us the ability to have a waiting room, an amazing foyer with incredible wallpaper, a Gothic kind of staircase that tied it all together, Fred's office, where he later dies in the midst, surrounded by his family's artifacts, remains that are embedded in various objects that he has placed around the funeral parlor. And it also gives us a suggested great location for the stage builds, which were the embalming room and the cremation room, that, like you said, originally were not meant to burn in reality, but we had to basically rethink them and redress them with items that were purchased that could be burnt, but that would also be safe in a situation where you had actors interacting with the cremation room exploding when Charlie throws her vaping into the fire and creates the explosion. So all of this was created to simulate the basement of that octagonal building with this feeling of the Gothic taste of the other location as well. So it was really a marriage of three different locations and lots of technical things that had to be considered in the things that were used safety wise and working with pyrotechnics. So this was a really fun, challenging set for all of us. I think there's a lot of thought and a lot of effort went into making it work the way it did. The post-cremation scenes are another dress, essentially. We build it up. We had a lot of breakaway stuff in there that it would explode. And then at the end shot, we dressed it so that it was post-explosion, where everything looked like the fire had been at one point. This is the kind of sets that I enjoy doing. They're very challenging, but they're so much fun.
That's the other thing, Cathy. I'd love for you to share a little bit about the New York set dressing crews and department do a lot of things that other cities don't necessarily do. So set dressers are responsible for laying tile and flooring, and just you can just share a little bit about how it's different working in New York.
Well, it's true. We normally, in some of the other cities, the union crews will deal with construction. Will do a lot of providing of the hardware and the tiling and doing the labor for a lot of that, flooring, door hardware, whatever. In New York, it's the responsibility of the set dressing and set deck department to procure all of these things and show samples. We do the carpeting, we do the flooring, we do the, wallpapering and the fabric with the help of the art department's input on some of the things as well. And so that's a lot more labor intensive for the set dressing and set deck crews to gather all those resources together. And so I value my assistants and buyers who have some knowledge of construction and can read a floor plan and can, understand speccing hardware. I mean, that job alone normally is a construction department thing, but it's a valuable skill for a set decorator or a set decorating assistant or buyer to have, and very critical on the East Coast.
Yeah, and Judy, this was the first episode that filmed for this season, even though sequentially it comes up as second. And Natasha was the director, and there was you had a little bit more of a runway on this first episode as opposed to every 10 days. How do you present ideas and concepts to Natasha? Is she tactile? Like what is that collaboration?
Well, it was a good thing we did 202 first, because it really did require a lot more prep time, and we actually needed every minute of it. Working with Natasha as a director is fantastic because she's very clear and very precise in what she wants. And she wrote a script as well, so she was understanding of the origin and the history of what kind of story she wanted to tell. So working with her, we spat ideas back and forth. So it's her, Jaren, the DP on that particular episode, and myself. The three of us would sit and go through the script and talk about the various ways in which we can express, let's say, what the movie within the movie was going to be like. And that was sort of the biggest layer that we had to hone in on, because it kept sort of changing and moving. And because we had a little bit more time, it did evolve and didn't really land until sort of closer to when we were filming. And it finally did come together. But there were also the locations that we were trying to marry, and how we could modify the cheat between the two locations, and how she was going to block those shots, and that was going to also affect how much of the doorway we were going to see. So the entrance had to be cheated from the exterior to the interior. So there was a lot of overlap that we had to marry. But I think, yeah, like you said, it was the first one, and it really was. I can't imagine that would have worked had we shot this while we were filming or getting ready for any other episode during the season. So it was good that we shot this first. So we're looking at the location on the college campus, and what you're seeing in this rendering is what the final composite was going to be to see out at the reverse of the exterior location, which is the Dobbs Ferry location here. So the door to this is where they enter. From the outside, we sort of see her come in profile, and then we pick her up at this location as she's already in. So we didn't really have to do any sort of composite, and I don't think that's how it ended up in the final edit anyway. So this was just to show her that we could shoot it this way if we wanted, and do it with visual effects in post.
And I think that what I appreciated kind of witnessing a little bit, the initial presentation to Natasha and some of the producers was done in such a wonderful, almost old school way. There were like giant black presentation boards and lots of photographs. And I think the meeting lasted 4 hours, right?
6.
6.
Yeah.
But Natasha seemed to really love playing with fabric and moving photographs around. And I think in a post-COVID, world, that's why what's so fun about working on film is getting to collaborate with other artists. So she seemed to really embrace being able to touch things. So
yeah, and I think the meetings for her were helpful because it prompted, although we were talking about fabric or paint colors, it would prompt her to think about some other aspect of that episode. So it really is this full circle. It's not just isolated to the art department or set deck or props. She really does think globally and realize, oh, if we did that, then this can happen, and then we can see this later. And so it's this. That was one of the reasons why that initial meeting went longer than scheduled, because it became about so many other aspects of that particular episode that I think we all found very helpful, because we get to go on the journey with her and see the bigger picture of what she's imagining or would like to show.
Yeah, it became a blocking meeting in a way, because she would see set dressing and items and illustrations or concept pieces that we had put together on those boards, and then it triggered her and Jaron to get very specific about how they were going to shoot those scenes. So it was great for everybody.
yeah. And Cathy, how long does it take to put together those kind of boards? I know you often do really wonderful kind of mood boards for your sets, but it went bigger scale on that.
They go a little bigger scale, yeah, when they're 4 by 6 feet in size. It depends. I mean, it's just gathering. We try to gather our resources in advance so that I can, show Judy and show the director what set dressing elements I've found and what we can pull into it. Judy can overlay on that her color schemes and some of the things that she's visualizing that link all the scenes together. So it's great. I mean, it's a combined effort between the art department and their boards, and then our boards as well from set deck. I think they're helpful visually to everybody.
Yeah, it's wonderful seeing things in front of you as opposed to just on a screen. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, this was really great. It kind of established the funeral parlor and the fact that there was a movie crew there, and they're shooting this movie scene on one side, and Greta is now explaining to Fred some of the terminology of the film business that she's learned from hanging out with the film crew, and she's very excited to have this kind of new life energy in this stodgy old funeral home that she's been feeling trapped in. Giancarlo Esposito is really great here in his insistence that things remain the same and that his family traditions are very important.
Yeah, it's one of the few scenes that we see the wide shot of the viewing room going into the display room, which is a nice connection. So you realize the layout of the entire set and how it connects. So that viewing room had 3 different changeovers. And I think we ended up shooting back and forth a few times, so which was challenging schedule-wise for the set dressing crew to do the movie set and then do the biker funeral and then back to the movie set.
And also, Jaron tried to consciously change the lighting somewhat for each of those scenes. He had a very specific lighting in mind for the heliocentricity movie, so that it looked kind of burnt out and on some level a little cheap, kind of a tier movie, indie film. And then he changed the lighting for some of the other scenes that were more real life scenes.
Yeah, lots of atmosphere for
Lots of atmosphere here. And then in the exteriors of this great location, there's a cemetery with headstones that we brought in that were prop rentals. Our greens department did a great job bringing in some greens, planting flowers, things to get trampled. We had built signage.
How do you infuse humor into the sets?
Sometimes the sets have to contain clues that are in the script that reveal the murder or the different characters over time. So that's a lot of fun too. When in the waiting room, when Charlie comes in and meets Fred, and they're talking about, he's kind of verklempt because everything's in disarray, and he's pointing out the fact that they sell objects that the family's remains can be placed in. And that was a whole nother journey of trying to find set dressing and objects that looked like they might have remains in them, or that we would have our scenic department add remains to. So there were displays of fun objects and things that they refer to in the script that were very dear to Fred and were also intrinsic to the plot. For when Greta is now unlived, she's now deceased, and Fred has put her remains into the record that is playing on the Victrola. So, and he refers to his family's remains in different objects in the set. So there's a lot of interesting, playful, creative things that tie into the set dressing and the props specifically that we all have to take into consideration.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of maybe this funeral home has seen better days. You get that sense of it, and also that everything is for sale. That's a sort of a racket of funeral homes, and Fred definitely, is hustling.
And I think for a lot of the humor, in terms of what we put in front of the camera, it's you end up just playing it straight, right? So it's really just about the timing and the actors' expressions as they refer to the painting of the grandfather, or when Charlie shows the pink vape when she's on the beach. It's those moments. We don't have to necessarily go over the top. And I think the more understated they are, with maybe just a slight tweak, it ends up being really funny. And it's really about the actors and their delivery and how they frame each of those objects. But yeah, there's a lot of those moments throughout the series, but also for this particular episode.
Were there any special props that were made for this episode, or what were some of the challenging things to find?
Well, we had to create a lot because they were so specific and they don't really exist in real life. I mean, once again, her vape, Ryan wanted it to be oversized. So Duke had to create that, and we made a graphics for it, and that was kind of funny. And Natasha wanted it hot pink. So that was a very specific item that had to be fabricated. And then in terms of all the set dressing that's, Cathy mentioned, she can talk more about it, but all the remains, it was specifically scripted as almost like cutaway shots that we were going to see these, whether they were urns or photograph frames or
stained glass objects, paperweights, fireworks. All of it kind of played into the end of the episode and building Fred's backstory as well.
Yeah, and the clear casket, she ended up smoking in, so that had to be modified.
We had to put ventilation in it, yes.
That came from some unknown vendor in Miami, the leap of faith. I hope it arrives. I've never worked with them before, and it was perfect.
It was
so
brilliant.
funny.
Yeah. We had to make sure it opened correctly. We had to put a ventilation hoses so that she could breathe in case it got too smoky in there. And then the Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny. The record is pretty classic, but you definitely get a sense that there's kind of remains or ashes embedded in the surface of it,
which is a real thing.
Yeah.
People do that, which I didn't know until we did this episode. That
you can have jewelry, glass objects. A lot of people have glass necklaces and stuff with the remains embedded.
Should we talk about another episode?
Sure.
Can I ask you a little about Hometown Hero? Cathy, do you want to talk a little bit about this episode?
This episode was Charlie working with a sports team that was in upstate New York, and she kind of fell into the job. Carol Kane is wonderful as the owner of the baseball team. It's a baseball team, like it's been around, but they've never kind of broken through. So there's an aging pitcher who's kind of, he's lost his mojo. He's no longer able to do 103 pitch anymore. So he and his team workers realize that the baseball team is about to go under and close eventually, or maybe hire this young up and coming pitcher. So they decide to come up with a plot to have a gambling thing on the last few games so that they end up making the money before the team falls apart. And this leads to a murder. And so we had a great location upstate in New York that was a baseball field, a small baseball stadium. We had to kind of make it look a little more funky because it was quite a nice stadium. Replace all their signage, redo the dugouts so that it looked like a home team kind of feel to it. Incorporate their mascot, which is this cheesemonger, because they were the cheesemonger baseball team. And so that was kind of fun playing with some of these characteristics. And we created these kiosks of merchandise that the customers were coming by and use when they're watching the game. So this was a lot of fun, scouting out these objects, making them, clearing them, printing them, whatever we had to do to create this feeling of the cheesemonger baseball stadium. We did their dugout. We created their clubhouse, the locker room, and the manager's office. And these were all done on the stage. So they had to incorporate a number of layers and the team colors, and several scenes were shot in the clubhouse. Judy, what was your kind of motivation for some of the sets on this?
The initial challenge of this episode was finding a baseball stadium that looked like a small town that was a little bit more on the funkier side and perhaps had been around and had seen better days. This was a little bit more polished than what we were looking for. So like you mentioned, we tried really hard to kind of bring it down and make it feel smaller scale and not as grand or as polished. But I think it worked, and with sort of limited framing, that also helped. So the build of the locker room area, that was based on kind of what the hallway at the location looked like and how it would feel or connect to the rest of the stadium. So this was at the location, and we connected our build off of this, and we painted the entire lower part of, I added that dado line that went, easily 75 feet that everyone pushed back on, but I think it really did help. Otherwise, you just look at this taupe corridor that it had very little visual interest, in my opinion. But and then adding the colors and the signage also really helped to connect our stage to the location. Yeah, this room had to be big enough to not pull walls and hold all the players with camera crew and all the actors coming in and out of the 4 or 5 different entry points. And we also connected the manager's office, which I thought worked out well This was just a room off to the back, and I think it all turned out so great, and it photographed really well. So yeah, everyone was happy. I'm happy. It worked seamlessly.
Can you talk about how the cheesemonger Buddha statue was created? Because I remember that quite vividly, and I'd love to hear how it started from sketch, who built it, what it was made of. There he is, right there on the right.
Hiram.
Hiram.
Hiram, our cheesemonger mascot. So the idea originally came from Tony Toast, our showrunner and writer of this episode. He had an idea of this is kind of I think he had some clip art that he had found that we sort of based our character on. And we did a few rounds of Colin Brantley, our fabulous Charge Scenic, had one of his, or maybe he did it himself, come up with a few ideas of what we could achieve in our time period to sculpt this character. So he worked with our graphics department to come up with like a more cute version, a sort of more menacing version, a cartoon version, and we ended up with this sort of hybrid Hiram. And yes, that got sculpted at the very last minute and got aged and put on that plinth and brought to location. And I think we were leveling that thing as they were beginning to shoot, because all the players had to rub his belly for good luck. And I think it turned out really well. It's such a great logo. All those T-shirts and baseball caps, all the set dressing you made flew by so quickly.
Yeah, Abigail was a great asset with all of that. Our
buyer. And then we incorporated some of the same elements into the monkey bar, where the players planned their illegal gambling scheme, and where the players tended to go and party. So we took over this whole bar in Brooklyn and redressed it to be full of cheesemonger or cheese-related objects and art from past games and seasons and all kinds of stuff. So this was a challenging dress, but a lot of fun as well. A lot of thank goodness I have such a good set deck buyers department, because we found some amazing items and objects online, but we also created some. So Scenics were involved, and it was a lot of fun to pull this together.
My favorite was the cheese grating hanging lights.
Yes, and that was Karen's idea to do that one specifically. So it was a great collaboration.
I love it.
And the broadcast booth was also a great build on the stage. There were it kind of tied into the exterior of the actual location with the design of the windows, and then the announcing elements to be kind of hometown electronics as well.
Yeah, the windows and the layout really was to reflect the building that you do see in a lot of the shots, where above home plate you see the bank of windows go across in sort of a hexagonal form. And this was obviously much bigger than it normally would be, just to once again house all the action that had to take place and the characters, and also to get camera crew in there.
And we suggested the organ that you would hear in the background of any baseball game. Dun 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 dun. Yeah. I don't know if we ever heard it or saw it, but it was there.
Episode 206 is Sloppy Joseph. Very funny episode with a homage to the movie Bad Seed. Cathy, can you talk a little bit about this story background of this?
This episode was way fun to do and create. Adam Arkin, brilliant actor and director, one of my favorites. He directed this, and it takes place in a grade school, kind of an elite little grade school, where the janitor's son is allowed to go to this school because as part of his pay. So we have the janitor established. He's a very nice man. The son is really cute and sweet, but there happens to be an evil seed little girl kind of who's very bright but very manipulative of all the adults around her, the principal, everything. And then when Charlie comes onto the scene, she tries to manipulate Charlie, and she's obsessed with being the best at everything. She's supposed to be she sees herself as the best student, the best child, the best everything, but she's quite evil. And Elijah then has a magic trick that he does with the pet gerbil that belongs in the classroom. And the classroom has created a little ark kind of structure for the gerbil to live in, and all the kids love this cute little gerbil. And Elijah does a magic trick with the gerbil that works in his practices, but the little girl rigs it so that it kills the gerbil during the performance of the magic trick. At one point, this is a recreation of the ark inside the classroom. In the corner is the ark for the actual gerbil, and it's kind of in memorial for the gerbil. But this was a fun little set to create in the actual classroom, the interior of the ark.
And how much time did you have to create that ark?
Not a lot. Judy, what do you think?
That arc, that scene is when the classroom and Elijah's traumatized for the magic trick gone awry. So the kids, the teacher, put this arc together to sort of welcome Elijah back to class. And so this was a great collaboration with the scenic department, set deck, set dressers, props. This came together in like 2-3 days. I laugh because it sounds so crazy. But somehow it got done and it turned out really well.
These were various early on suggestions for how the classroom arc could look. And then we pulled elements from some of these things and created our own arc in the classroom and the set arc as well.
Right, because this was, it was, once again, it was a collaboration between set deck and props. This is where the gerbil lived, is in this arc. This classroom was based on the gerbil's actual arc that the gerbil lives in, come to life.
Right. And there were playground scenes that we created. I think we shot at a school up in New Rochelle or in Westchester also. The school was great, allowing us to take it over, and it was during their summer session, so we could work inside and outside, but we brought in all of this playground equipment. And this was one of the classrooms we modified to be the music room that plays into the script. And then there was a display of all kinds of school projects that the kids presented. This was the library that we also modified. We built, scenic department built our tree of life here in the background, and we had the 4 seasons on the walls, and mostly brought in some color to create this educational environment for the kids. A lot of scenes took place in this library.
Yeah, there were a lot of great details in that set, especially around the tree. And how did you get all the colored tables? Was that a scenic?
We made those with scenic vinyls, yeah. And we changed the lighting, and we, just made it less cluttered from what it was as a real library. Took some things out, but then made it more kid-sized and scaled.
Yeah, I recall that room as being really full and dark.
Very full, dark. Yeah, the reverse had a bank of computers where there was a computer scene that played into the kids doing research on something. But yeah, this was to just make it more kid-friendly.
My memory of this episode is you and Karen and your entire set deck and set dressing team, like living at the school. There was so much to do. There were so many spaces that had to get peeled back and then redressed with our world. And it was a lot of work, and you guys did an amazing job, and you took care of all the last details, and you were like there for 2 weeks. 2 weeks straight. I never saw you.
A lot. And then on stage, we built this what was the janitor's basement office. And there was one very similar at the actual location, but it didn't work as well as this building a set. So we brought in the washer dryer, and we brought in some of the elements that would have been at the location, and added some religious overtones that the father JB was attached to, and the demonstration that Elijah gives of his magic trick to his father. So it kind of deepened their relationship a little bit, or reflected their relationship and his hard work as the janitor for the school. And then we also saw JB's and Elijah's apartment at one point. Again, this was a reflection of his kind of middle income, but homey, good father, single father kind of approach to their relationship, which added to, kind of some heart to the story. And it was a contrast to the kind of elite kids that went to the school and the little girl who was our protagonist.
Yeah, and there's a nice sense of, because he's a widow, and there's a feeling of, there was a woman who originally decorated this, but two men now live there. So that visually really, you just get it right when you look at the sets.
His janitor's space, the office, when we scouted that location originally, Adam loved everything about it. And we were planning on filming there because it had so many layers, like years of tools and all the things that they use daily. And so it didn't work out schedule-wise, so we ended up having to build it. But he said, oh, it'd be great if you could replicate exactly what this is. Sure, in 4 days, absolutely. And yeah, you guys did an amazing job of putting in the layers that really helped sell the space.
Yeah, the layered sets are always just so delicious. And that was very layered.
Here we have the bathroom, which is a pivotal part of the story, where our demon seed child overhears Charlie and the principal talking from stall to stall. It gets revealed that she's outside and hears the whole thing. And then there's a couple of other scenes in here as well where Charlie confronts her. And this was a bill kind of loosely based on what was at the location. Obviously, we changed it up for our storyline and blocking and made it bigger to film inside without having to pull walls, even though that was an option. But yeah, Cathy, I love all the small scale stuff that you guys found.
Again, we have some great vendors that contributed to this set, and some good research and procuring by our set deck department.
Right. And then the challenge of this space was the tile that we had to paint. We had to make our own tile and paint it. And that was a bit time consuming. I mean, once again, it's, so much of our decision is based on what's available in 5 days. And so we don't have time to order things so it worked out, but it was a lot of drying time because it took 3 coats to get that tile finish just right.
I just have a question for both of you. What would you tell your earlier self when you first started in the business, based on what you've learned after all these years? What would you tell yourself not to sweat over anymore?
That's a tough one. I would say trust your instincts and trust your intuition of what you think creatively, what you think the sets need to be and what the direction needs to be, and don't necessarily second guess it. Like that first impulse of after reading the script and the feeling that you get, it is intuitive, at least it is for me, before you actually put it into motion and figure out the logistics of how things are going to happen. I would say to trust that. And that has kind of stayed with me. Even though there were certain times in my career where I would second guess, like, well, maybe it shouldn't be that, maybe it should be more this. But in hindsight, you always kind of go back to that original idea. So it's just more about trusting your instincts and your intuition of what what the material is that you're designing or working on.
I agree with Judy on that. Had been thinking something similar to that. Often your first intuition about something turns out to be the right direction, and you can play with the other options, and then often you'll come back to that first bubbling up of, oh, that would be nice, or this resonates, and learning to trust your intuition, and also I think trusting your ability to listen to the input of other people, and go, oh, that's a perspective that I hadn't thought of, or that's something that adds another layer that I can, so you learn to let go of some ego on some levels, and allow the whole project to be better when the cooperation between departments and between individuals works.
And I think a show like Poker Face, it really does benefit from everyone's collaboration. And it is, Ryan sets that tone, which is the best idea wins. So it is, we all talk about, discuss what could be the best version of X, Y, and Z. And it's a very strong collaboration. And it's a show I don't think could work without it, because you're doing it such breakneck speed that, I think you have to stay open to the possibilities of like, okay, what if we did it that way? Let's hear it out, and let's see if that could work. Or so that ability does come in handy often on projects, for sure.
Well, thank you so much on the behalf of Inside the Set with Set Decor. I really appreciate getting to chat with both of you. And I can't wait to see the rest of Poker Face Season 2.
Thanks, Karen. It's fun.
Thanks, Cathy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.